All right, we are live. Hey, everyone. It's Eric Holtzman with Mindful Motion LA, and I'm here with Jackie Hackett. She is a registered dietitian, an intuitive eating counselor, the owner of Hackett Health, the creator of the anti-diet approach, and a personal trainer. So it's a long resume.
Thank you.
Can we start this just kind of telling a little bit about yourself and your story and how you got into the field you're in?
Yeah, so I grew up being an athlete. I grew up in LA, was always very, very active. I played volleyball for a little bit in college, and then I pretty much stopped playing sports, stopped working out, started to have some of my own health issues like digestive issues, went to the doctor. They didn't really have any answers. They were like, here, take this medication that may or may not help. And I started to look more into nutrition. I'd never really thought about nutrition prior to college. I grew up, we ate pretty healthy, but we would still eat fast food once a week, pizza every now and then. And never really realized that the foods we put into our body can impact us in the way that we feel. So I started just learning about nutrition on my own. Um, then I graduated college. I was already double majoring in psychology and sociology, and they didn't have a nutrition program, so couldn't even switch majors if I wanted to at UCSB. So then I decided to get my master's in nutrition, which was a very long process because I had no science background. So I had to go to community college for a few years. And in that process, I became a personal trainer because I was really missing that active lifestyle component. I worked for Equinox for about a year, where I learned a lot about just programming and corrective exercises, and looking at the body as a whole. That is one important aspect I liked from Equinox. But through that, I fell into the trap of, you know, diet culture, which we'll discuss a lot in a moment. But trying to look a certain part, being in the gym, trying to like body build and restrict what you're eating, not eating like unhealthy foods, and counting my calories and macros and all of that we're all so familiar with, to the point that it became obsessive. And I had disordered eating for a while, actually in college as well. I didn't realize I had disordered eating until grad school, when I started learning about it and when I ultimately discovered intuitive eating as a whole. So that's kind of what launched me to, try to overcome my disordered eating. And, I became a dietitian, took 3 years in grad school, got my master's, and then passed my board exam to become a dietitian. I worked in hospitals for a little while. I worked at Kaiser as an outpatient dietitian, and then I started, my private practice, where I could really truly help the people that I wanted to help in the way that I wanted to help them. And that's kind of where I'm at now.
Okay, cool. So where's your passion stem from in regards to like nutrition and helping people eat healthier?
I think, I mean, there's a couple aspects of that, but the biggest one was, me having those digestive health issues in college, and realizing that it wasn't just the nutrition, but it was also the mental aspect. Because if our stress is through the roof, our digestive health, right, our brain gut connection can cause lots of issues there. So it really wanted me to help other people overcome their disordered eating, help them look deeper at what's actually causing your digestive issues, right? So I do have an emphasis now on focusing on gut health and how much our gut actually impacts our health. So just kind of living through that experience and not getting answers from any doctors. So I want to be, the go-to person for people to come to, and they're like, I've tried everything, nothing's working. I'm fed up with it, and just kind of give them that resource.
Okay, yeah. So you're a niche in a sense, in a niche market. I mean, I can relate to that because I'm kind of like the last resort for people when PT, Chiro don't work, and other modalities. They seek something out for their physical pain. So it sounds like similar for you with nutrition.
Yeah,
Um,
definitely.
so this gut health thing, it's like a big movement right now. This last like decade or so, a lot of research in it. Still seems like a lot of people are not really sure what it's all about. I guess, what would you say, like, how does gut health impact our well-being, our weight loss efforts, our inflammatory load in our system?
Yeah, so in a lot of ways, first off, our when we refer to our gut or our digestive tract as a whole, it starts in our mouth, goes all the way our esophagus, our stomach, down to our intestines, and then our bowel. Ultimately, that's our digestive tract. When people refer to gut health more specifically, they're talking about like the microbes in our colon, right? So our gut is where digestion and absorption of key nutrients take place, and our gut microbiome contains, we're still learning, but they say somewhere close to around trillions of microbes and bacteria. And those bacteria then, they break down food, they create other substances, right? They produce neurotransmitters, right? Everyone's probably familiar with like serotonin, right? Our happy hormone. So if that's not working properly, our mood is going to be, disrupted, right? Serotonin is then a precursor to melatonin, which is our sleep hormone. So our sleep can be impacted. Some of the bacteria also help, things that are happening in our gut also help make dopamine, right, which affects how we think and feel. So those are kind of like the three big key players. In terms of gut health and weight loss, the research is still fairly new. There are a couple of studies in rats showing that certain gut bacteria can either lead someone to be in a larger body or to be at a lower weight. There was actually a South Park episode I just saw recently about something called fecal transplant. And they were talking about Tom Brady and how, his fecal transplant was helping people lose weight when they were taking his poop and giving it to other people, because it helped create that good environment in their gut. So I found that South Park's usually pretty up to date on what's happening around us.
They
Um,
always are hilarious, and it's an actual procedure people have done. They do this for real.
yes, yeah. And then also to clarify, right, fecal transplant, the person is not eating the poop, because no, like seriously, some people have that question. It's inserted in another way, right? And then in regards to inflammation overall, so the inner lining of our intestines, it has like really tight junctions, right? It's almost just like a barrier with millions of cells. If this barrier starts to leak, right, it's almost like the wall is breaking down, there's holes in it. So gut bacteria or toxins can then get into the bowel wall, get into our bloodstream, our lymph nodes, which can then result in a immune response and increased inflammation. So this is what we refer to as leaky gut, or the medical term is intestinal permeability.
Heard that many times. So, just to elaborate on this, so people kind of have a better picture of what causes this breakdown of the barrier. I've heard that processed foods, higher sugar diets, seed oils, these types of things that create free radicals in the system or extra stress have a higher potential of breaking that barrier down. Would you say that's fair?
Yeah, so it's essentially our diet can play a huge role in that. But essentially, it causes what's called a dysbiosis. So there's some sort of bacterial imbalance due to, poor diet or not eating adequate, right amounts of protein. Could be, too much sugar. For some people, it could be other item like alcohol. Alcohol is very, very damaging to the gut, not so good for us. And then other genetic factors are possible as well.
So, how would someone get a beat on knowing that that could be occurring with them? Like, what kind of symptoms might they feel? Like, would there be maybe a disruption in their bowel movements or their mood or their energy or things of that nature?
Yeah, so common symptoms could be like chronic diarrhea, constipation, bloating. Unfortunately, those three symptoms could be a sign of a lot of gut imbalances going on, or it could also be like extreme stress or anxiety. So we can't just always like, oh, I have constipation, I must have leaky gut. But if you're having like chronic fatigue, maybe headaches, even joint issues or skin problems arise from the gut. So it's kind of like combination of all of that. And if like, hey, my diet is just really, really poor, you're not working out, and you kind of check off all those boxes, it is something that you could definitely consider.
It's funny you bring up the anxiety thing, because I have to say, like, every time I drink a little too much, the next day I'm down, I'm a little more anxious. And it's like totally, once I back on my normal, I feel normal again. I'm happy. It's very much an obvious comparison for me.
Yeah, definitely. And alcohol is also a depressant, so that doesn't help either.
Yeah, for sure. Uh, so there are tests out there these days to check your gut microbiome, but I've heard a wide array of opinions on that in regards to like, it's not really good enough yet to give you really any useful information. Like, what are your thoughts about that? Like testing your bacteria?
Yeah, so the test that I use, and that's has pretty great evidence, is something called the GI map, which is usually ordered through a company called Diagnostic Solutions. We kind of see it in functional medicine as the gold standard for testing. They really do a wide array of testing. There are other companies out there, even companies that are doing like food sensitivity tests, or send us your saliva or your blood, and we're going to tell you which foods work for you or don't work for you. Those are not backed by science, right? We can only really test, like, do you have an immunological allergy, like a real true allergy to food? It's kind of the same thing with the gut bacteria testing. So if you're considering doing it, I would say find a practitioner who does do the GI map.
So the food sensitivity test, like from Cyrex Labs, is that the place I think that does it?
There are a lot. I mean, just go on TikTok, like all the influencers are like boasting them. Yeah, if it's like a IgG mediated response, that's really just telling us like, had you eaten that food in the past, or did you recently just eat it? It's not saying that like you're having an actual IgE, which is an actual immunological like allergy to it. But food sensitivities are very real, right? We can have true food sensitivities and intolerances, which can cause a whole host of issues. So I'm not saying they're not real. There's just the only test for that is actually to do an elimination diet.
Okay. Okay. So what can people do then to improve their health, because their gut health? Because I know that food obviously is a big factor, but are there other techniques or things that people can do to that doesn't not it's not food related potentially?
Yeah, so starting with not food related, or even how we eat our food, to like eat more mindfully, right? To remove stress, like not eating with distraction. If you're like sending a work email and you're eating your salad, number one, you're not even registering that you're eating the meal, but your digestion's not going to be working properly because you're probably stressed out, right? So trying to reduce stress as much as possible. We're all stressed. That's life, but how can we try to, especially around mealtime, reduce that stress? Put away distractions, when we're eating. Slow down, chew your food better, because digestion begins in the mouth, right, with different enzymes and actually chewing your food. It's most people just take a couple bites and then swallow it. That doesn't really help for our digestion. Getting adequate sleep, right? Drinking enough water, and moving your body as well, especially someone who's like constantly, chronically constipated. Just actual movement can actually get things moving in the body. So staying active, equally as important. And that's kind of all, not diet related.
And what are your thoughts on maybe getting into like dirt and actually in nature and like touching things that might expose you to different microbes?
In that sense, I thought you were going to go the other way and just say in terms of like grounding us and energy,
That's
because that's important as well. That can get us out of that fight or flight, and literally ground us to the energy of the earth, which can also help. But I'm all for getting dirty. Like kids these days who are, have to use antibacterial soap, and parents are afraid of germs. Like, I mean, we've seen what's happened by not having germs around because of COVID and everyone masking. Now there's all these other, RSV, all these other viruses and such. So we want to be exposed. There's nothing. There are good and bad bacteria, and we want the right amount of each. But we don't want to completely eliminate all bacteria.
it seems like maybe part of that, this rise of autoimmune disorders within our society is related to some of that, and also our processed food. I would think these things kind of work together in creating more vulnerability. Um,
Yeah, I mean, I think we don't have enough research yet to correlation is not equal causation, but I think we can definitely make some assumptions on some of these things for sure.
oh, don't tell people in research that you're assuming things. Uh, since we're on this idea of like fads and things that are kind of prevalent within the nutrition space, this idea of fasting is super popular right now. Um, Man, I could never fast back in the day. I was a college athlete and I would eat like 6 times a day. Thinking of missing a meal would just be like brutal for me. Now fasting is like just my norm. I guess my question then is like, what role do you think fasting plays in living a long, healthy life, if any role?
Um, so my nutrition philosophy is intuitive eating, and we see fasting as a diet because you're telling your body you cannot eat after a certain time when maybe you are hungry.
Mm,
Um, we all naturally fast, right? We eat dinner at 6, 7 p.m. We wake up at 6 a.m. and we don't eat till 7 or 8 in the morning. That's, generally a 12 to 14-hour fast on its own.
mm.
Unless people are, out late midnight snacking and stuff. But we all naturally fast, which is why breakfast is right, break fast. And we do want some break, right? We need to let our digestive system get a rest during that time. But in terms of my belief system, I don't think that we have to like have a certain
Mm.
hours of the day that our food needs to be eaten in. For some people, it's like natural, like, hey, I don't like breakfast. I eat around 11 each day. Cool. I'm not going to force you to eat breakfast if that's what you've been doing your whole life. But what does the rest of your day look like, right? Are you starving by 7 p.m. because you didn't allow yourself to eat earlier in the day? Like it's very case by case and individual. I have looked at the research, of course, and especially for women, it doesn't seem very sound, that it can cause a whole host of issues in terms of hormones and such. But I know plenty of people out there who live by it and swear by it, and they feel great with it. And at the end of the day, I'm all for whatever works for each individual person.
Sure. So that makes perfect sense. I mean, you kind of listen to the signals your body's giving you and work off that. Uh, but I can imagine that some people have disordered signaling in some way. So if you're eating at 9 p.m. and you wake up at 6 a.m. and you're eating right away, even though you feel hungry, maybe it's just your conditioning. Does that kind of happen sometimes as well?
Yeah, absolutely. We could be conditioned to like the clock. Like you may not be hungry, but you're like, oh, but I always eat breakfast at 8 a.m. Um, I always challenge people to, we all have our habits and our routines, and we're creatures of habit. I challenge people to sometimes just, first and foremost, we have to become aware. Like, are we even aware of what we're doing? And then question, like, is this actually the right way that's for me? Or have I been living 40 years this way because my mom told me this when I was 10? Right. To just kind of question that norm, and really see, right? So that's what is a part of the intuitive eating process, is just figuring out what works best for you, tuning into your body, listening to those internal hunger cues. And like you said, some people, their hunger and fullness signals may be dysregulated. Like anyone who has a history of dieting, disordered eating, trauma, like you can't really feel your hunger signals in the same way. So we have to figure out like, okay, what does hunger actually feel like to you? And there's kind of like a questionnaire and different exercises we can do over time to figure that out. But initially, yeah, you can't just tell anyone like, just listen to your body. It's going to tell you everything. That's likely not going to work. It is going to take some trial and error and figuring it out.
Yeah, I mean, that would work for someone who's kind of in tune with things and already in touch with their system, but that's not the majority. Um,
Yeah, most people are not aware of many things. Like, we're so out of touch with our body compared to, I mean, I don't know how many years ago, but it's really pretty sad, like, as a society as a whole.
Yeah, just advancements technologically and all these new progressions in certain components of society is amazing, but it comes with some consequences, it seems. Since we're on that topic, can you kind of just elaborate what intuitive eating is? Like, what are the core principles? Why does it work?
Yeah, so intuitive eating is it's an evidence-based self-care practice. It was created by two dietitians and researchers, I want to say in the 70s. It helps people heal their relationship with food and their body. So, what does that mean, right? It has 10 principles to kind of help guide you, right? And it's founded on the premise of, first and foremost, we have to reject diet culture. So we have to kind of define, what does diet culture mean? Like fasting or keto, Atkins, Whole30, Noom, Weight Watchers, like those are diets. Even something as simple as like, I can't eat past 6 p.m. because I'm going to gain weight or be fat. That's diet culture, right? The evidence is pretty clear that diets do not work in the long run, right? 95% of diets fail after year one, and after year two, 99% of them. So the diet industry is a $72 billion industry for a reason. People go on a diet because, first off, they go on the diet because society's standards are that we all need to be thin and shrink ourselves and be as small as possible. All right. So people go on a diet to lose weight. They sometimes lose weight, right? Like, yeah, diets will work initially, but then they can't sustain it because it's oftentimes too restrictive, right? You have to cut out all carbs, or you can only eat a certain time, or you feel guilt and shame because, oh, I ate a slice of pizza, like, oh my god, I'm terrible now. And then this like backlash, and it's very psychological. But ultimately the diets are too restrictive. They gain back the weight, and then they feel like they failed. So then they search for the next new diet, right? And then that's what we call, yo-yo dieting, and ultimately weight cycling, where their weight was here. They were probably at a pretty healthy weight. Maybe their BMI was, according to a doctor, overweight or obese, right? But we definitely have seen in the research, right, that we can be at a higher weight and still be healthy, right? Looking at your metabolic health and your other lab values. But they may be at this higher weight, but they lose weight, then they gain more weight, and then they lose weight and they gain more weight. And in the long run, that weight cycling is actually a greater predictor of negative health outcomes, right? Is a greater predictor of cardiovascular disease, and other diseases. So that's go on forever about that, but that's it. Does that make sense? Like, in a nutshell, kind of what intuitive eating is,
Yeah, I
or
mean,
like
it kind of
why it is.
yeah, I mean, it sounds pretty relatively straightforward and common sense in a way. Like, it just, I'm sure, is not always so simple because it's a complex system we are as humans. But I think it's important to just touch on this idea, like doing this yo-yo dieting, keto, then going off, and then doing something else, and going off, going through these cycles of maybe starving yourself and then overfeeding. This idea that maybe that damages your metabolism, causes metabolic dysfunction, and could almost be permanent. I've heard things
Yep.
like that. Could you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, essentially, oftentimes if someone's on a diet, we always throw out the number 1,200 calories, but whether it's 1,000, 1,200, like, you open the diet app and it doesn't matter what your height, weight, sex is, you get this like super low calorie range, right, to put you in a caloric deficit. And people then restrict, and our body is very well adapted, right? It thinks, okay, this is the new set of calories I'm going to take in. So it recognizes that, and it starts to slow your metabolism down because it's saying, hey, tomorrow I might not get that same amount of calories. So how can I slow down, right, your basal metabolic rate, so that we are not burning everything that you're eating. And then that 1,200 calories was not sustainable. So you go back to maybe you're eating 1,600, 1,700. Well, now your metabolism is still running on the 1,200. So you're going to gain the weight, right? And that's essentially, that just keeps happening over and over again. But why initially the first couple diets usually work pretty well for people is because, your metabolism's still working pretty well.
Yeah, that kind of, I've heard that people often, if they eat more, sometimes will lose weight in certain circumstances, and which is sort of counterintuitive, but I guess that kind of ties in with what you're saying. If you're boosting your metabolic rate up, then maybe that also will be positive as long as you're exercising and other things.
Yeah, definitely coupled with exercise and, ensuring that your diet is nutrient dense and giving you all the things that you need.
So, you know, this day, especially now in the last few decades or the last 50 years, I guess, there's a tremendous rise in obesity. It's almost been called an obesity epidemic. I don't know if that's appropriate, but I guess what would you say the driving forces are surrounding this obesity epidemic?
I think that's the question of topic in every platform right now and every, key thought leader in the health space. And, I think the main things that we've seen is that energy consumption. I've heard multiple things. Energy consumption has gone up, but then other times I hear it actually hasn't. So I don't know about that.
Hmm.
But definitely, I would say we are way less active as a society due to the Industrial Revolution, due to technology and everything that we have. People are spending 5 hours per day watching TV, 2 hours on social media. So we're just not moving. I think as a whole, our mental health is also not good due to just everything that's been going on. That is also going to impact, right, our stress hormone, which then impacts our weight, which impacts our gut health. And then there's the whole claim of, the seed oils and the processed foods and all of these things. And I think it's some people are just choosing one thing to blame. Like every decade, there's something new, right? So 80s, it was fats, and then, eggs are bad, and then carbs are bad. And then they were blaming sugar. Like right now, more recently, is kind of like sugar in these processed foods. And then now it's like seed oils. Um, Nutrition is a science, and the science is always going to evolve and going to change. But we also have to keep looking at who's paying for the research, who's funding the research. And I don't know, I could go down like a rabbit hole of this of like what truly is causing us to be so sick, not just of like our weight but of our health overall. Cardiovascular disease on the rise and cancer is increasing, and everything else. So I don't really have an answer. That's just kind of I grew up eating Lucky Charms and Oreos and like all of those foods, and all my friends around me, and they are all healthy, however you want to define health and my sense of what I see it. So I don't feel like we can just solely blame those food items, right? And intuitive eating believes that as well, right? It's not just eating an Oreo is not going to cause you to get cancer, right? Eating Lucky Charms for breakfast or Special K is not going to, your arm's not going to fall off, or whatever else people are claiming these days.
Yeah, I mean, Paul Saladino, the carnivore guy, he's
Yep.
all about pointing to seed oil as like the
Yep.
main driver.
Yeah. I follow him. I mean, I believe we should eat meat, but I don't believe all of his claims.
Well, I mean, he's even changed his mind. He went from no carbs to adding honey to adding
Fruit
fruit.
only, raw milk.
Yeah, so like he's open to being wrong too, and that's the best answer. Always is I don't know anyway for these types of questions, right? Until you have a case in front of you.
Yeah,
Um,
or like Lane Norton, for example. I think he's even said multiple times, like, if my answer has not changed over time, then that means I'm not following the science and I'm not staying up to date. So yeah, exactly as we're saying, like it's going to continue to change. Um, and ultimately, like I said, it comes down to what works best for each individual person. I mean, you could look
yeah,
at like are you familiar with the Blue Zone groups?
Yeah, and Paul Saladino like just kind of takes that apart. You hear like,
No, I haven't heard his take on that.
oh well, he basically points out that some of the blue zones that they say they're vegan, they're actually not. They eat a lot of meat too, and some I guess the information's somewhat contradictory from different resources. But yes, I have heard of it, and there is something there for sure.
Gotcha. But
So,
yeah, even sorry, go ahead.
no, could you explain to everyone what the blue zones are? Because I'm sure most people don't know what that is.
Yeah. So I don't know how many there are around the world, but there are these communities all around the world. There's some in Italy, actually in LA. Loma Linda is one of them. Okinawa, Japan. They're just communities of people that have the highest number of centenarians, right? People that are living to be 100. So these people are healthy, right? And they look to see, they've been following them over all this time, and they're trying to figure out what do they have in common, right? So it's an epidemiological study. They're not manipulating anything. Um, and the diet component maybe could be different amongst those groups. But the key thing that it's telling us is it's not just their diet. They're all very active, not necessarily going to the gym and lifting weights, but just physically active in their day to day, right? They walk, they bike, they have community, right? The people around them, whether it's friends, family, like they're spending time with people, which uplifts our health. They have something that they believe in, like a purpose, right? In Japan, they call it like your ikigai. Whether it's, a higher power or you believe in afterlife, you just have some sort of purpose. What's the other? I think they have low levels of stress, and I feel like there was a sixth one. And then the diet itself is kind of more Mediterranean style. Maybe they'll drink wine a couple days a week, mostly fruits and veggies with whole grains. And yeah, some I've seen claim they eat a little bit of red meat or they eat a little bit of fish. Am I missing? That's kind of the gist of it, though, is like it's not just their diet that's making them healthy, it's that holistic approach.
Yeah, I think that's often forgotten. Like the community component is huge. Like if you're a solo person, you don't have family, you don't have friends, it's gonna take a toll on your health. And I think what that touches on is the tie between your mind and your health in a sense. I remember this study one of my mentors talked about, and they did a little a research like study on like two groups of people. One group had like a 600 calorie shake, and another had a lower calorie shake, and they lied to the person who got the 600 and said it was low calorie. They checked their blood sugar rises and all these like ghrelin increases and things of that nature, and they were the same amongst both, even though one was 3 or 4 times more calories. But because they believed it wasn't, their body responded differently. And so I guess this kind of leads into this idea: if you have positive things in your life, people to talk to, community, you shape a perspective, your mind's in a different place, it's going to change how your body responds to the things you eat and the stresses that you're under.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. I mean, our mind is so powerful, which is why I have a degree in psychology. I'm not a licensed therapist by any means, but I meditate. I've done, pretty good research on the impact of, gratitude and mental health and meditation. And I definitely incorporate that with my clients, that it's so important.
so we kind of were going this direction. I'm just curious what your take is on it. So, your take on the nutrition industry and the types of information it relays to the public. I guess the types of advice you find it gets misinterpreted or conflated. The people maybe are getting bad advice from the general, I guess the American United States directive, I suppose.
Um, yeah, I mean, we have TikTok influencers and we have Instagram people, and we live in what is it, an information overload or what am I trying to say? Plethora of information out there, right? We have access at our fingertips, but you could literally Google, is sugar good for me? And you're going to find something that says, yeah, we need it. It's a carbohydrate. It's our energy source. Should, is sugar bad for me? You're going to find a bunch of, the same opposing arguments. So the sources of where you're getting your information from are definitely important, right? Just because someone looks thin and looks healthy and has 1 million followers and they're promoting this little shake, like, oh yeah, I look this way because I drink this. We got to question, like, that's total BS coming. I mean, maybe they are drinking it, maybe they're not, but like your genes are probably what made you look that way. So we really have to question, where are we getting this information from? And yeah, even the government, like the whole food pyramid back in the day. And I do believe in the healthy plate method that they have of like how to balance our plate. That's kind of the basis of what I recommend to my clients. But the whole recent, I'm sure you saw it, that like Lucky Charms are ranked higher than beef and eggs and regular milk, and all these processed, fake, plant-based meats are ranked higher, that we should eat more often. And, again, who paid for this funding? Well, not who paid for it. I think the Americans paid for it, but who's backing it, and who's doing the research? That we have to, unfortunately, take everything with a grain of salt.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely financially motivated, some of this stuff, like especially that whole story with the Seventh-day Adventist and like promoting sugar and demonizing saturated fat and this whole mess that it's created. It's been quite crazy. Same with cholesterol, right? Like that.
Yep.
Completely been over on its head.
Yeah, like don't eat eggs because it's going to raise your cholesterol. And then eggs got demonized. And like there's fads every generation, every 5-6 years, we have some sort of fad. So it's kind of like, how can you keep your head down? Do what you know is working well for you. Like check in with your labs. If they're not great, okay, we need to figure out what's going on with them. But not to choose some extreme fad, right? That it kind of has to be plain and simple. Like we just got to put in the work and just do it.
Yeah, and I think sometimes people get so caught up in following the science that's mainstream, even though they might not realize that it's mostly epidemiology, which is not a very high level of science that's really reliable. And most nutrition is that way because it's really difficult to set up double-blind controlled studies for research. That's very expensive and complicated, right? So I think it's almost like we should just go back to eating like our great grandparents, because they probably didn't really do anything but eat whole foods, and that was probably the best way to go.
Yeah, before there were microwave meals and all the other. I mean, I don't know. I think frozen foods can definitely be a good option when we're like short on time, and there are definitely some pretty nutritious ones out there. Like my freezer's always stocked with some sort of Trader Joe's frozen thing, but I'll pick and choose what I put in the fridge. But yeah, I agree with you.
I've heard too, maybe you can, I've never really looked this up, but some people have told me that getting like frozen vegetables might actually be a better way to get them because they're more fresh in a sense. They get them, they freeze them right away and they last longer. Is that true?
Yep. Yeah, that actually is true, right? And there's nothing wrong with canned goods either, right? Even if they are higher in sodium. That's a perfect example. Like that research on sodium is so outdated that no one should be following a low sodium diet unless you like really have a health condition like heart failure or something. But yeah, canned veggies they're convenient, especially if you're on a budget. Same with frozen. Oftentimes, our broccoli gets shoved in the back of the fridge and we find it 2 weeks later. Frozen veggies, that's not going to happen.
Yeah, that's interesting. Touching on salt, that's still a very much avoided thing among people, not adding salt to stuff. And after reading that Salt Fix book, I forget the guy's name.
Yep.
Have you read that book?
Dr. Nick James, I forgot his last name. It's like a long last name. Yeah, that changed my mind so much on salt.
Yeah, I mean, the amounts he was talking, like 10 grams a day. I was like, what? So I don't even worry about it. I just eat the salt that feels the right amount to taste, basically, is what he suggested, which kind of fits perfectly within the intuitive eating thing.
I don't think we need to be restricting sodium. Like that's the last of our worries.
So, my space and is really centered around people with physical problems and joint issues and things of that nature. And I notice sometimes when I'm eating better, my aches and pains can be somewhat improved. And I've definitely heard many anecdotal cases with people going keto or cutting out really inflammatory foods, and all of a sudden their joint pain, arthritic pain goes away completely, which might speak to an autoimmune disorder potentially. But I guess could you elaborate on how poor nutrition might contribute to joint pain and muscle pain, things of that nature?
Yeah, I mean, an anti-inflammatory diet, there's pretty good evidence on it that it can help alleviate some inflammation, especially I would say looking at gut health, right? Like we just found out recently that there's a specific gut bacteria that is causing arthritis, right? Which is that
Hmm.
inflammation in the joint. So yeah, I forgot, I want to say S. No, I'm not going to remember which gut bacteria it is, but we're still discovering and still learning. But like that's a perfect example of how, like, yeah, if we have overgrowth of that one bacteria, we're then going to get arthritis. And how do we get overgrowth of that one bacteria? From not eating some of the right foods. So that can correlate to that. um, and then, are we ultimately an anti-inflammatory diet is we're eating just healthy, nutritious, nutrient dense foods, right? High in antioxidants, to protect us from those free radicals, right? Just eating your fruits and veggies. Like when you look at the list of anti-inflammatory foods, it's minimally processed. Usually, it's going to be our fruits, our veggies, our whole grains, that are going to have those key nutrients that we need. But also, are we drinking adequate water? Um, and then kind of going back to what we already discussed, right? I don't think it's just our diet that can fully reduce our inflammation. It's also, are we managing our stress? Are we sleeping well? How are our relationships? That can also impact overall inflammation in the body.
Okay. You know, um, my dad is currently on like some severe antibiotics, and I think sometimes people aren't aware what that does to your gut and
Mm.
how someone. So, say you do antibiotics for some reason, what would you suggest someone does to try to get themselves back or restore their gut health and get back to a normal place?
Yeah, so when we take antibiotics, we are killing all the bacteria, not just the one that caused you to have that infection, which is really unfortunate. So immediately after, or even kind of like mid um, taking the antibiotics, you can start taking probiotics. I would say for at least about a month after taking the antibiotics, you can take just a general probiotic. I don't usually recommend probiotics just to everyone, right? Like most of us don't need to take probiotics. You can also eat, um, natural probiotic foods. So I would say doing that while you're on antibiotics as well, like kefir, yogurt, kimchi, miso. Um, But also, we need prebiotics, right? Which is the fiber that's going to feed that bacteria. So we can't just take the probiotic and think everything will figure itself out. That's why, again, our diet so important. We want to eat those prebiotic foods as well.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds very much in line with what I've heard. So I don't want to run out of time. I would love to hear what you've created this dietary approach called the anti-diet approach. So what does that entail? Like, what are the premises of that?
Yeah, so it is my new 12-week program that is, so I work mainly with women, helping them ditch the diet mindset and gain strength without necessarily having a gym. So it focuses on nutrition, movement, and mindset. And we cover how to eat intuitively, how to exercise in the proper way to gain strength without it being like, hours in the gym or doing burpees all day long. And then looking, like we discussed, like that holistic approach to it. But yeah, mainly working with women who have history of dieting, disordered eating, or eating disorders.
Okay. Why do you solely, well, not solely, but focus more on the women versus men and women?
Um, Over the years, women are more so the clientele that have just been attracted to me. I mean, I definitely have some, because I'm also a personal trainer, so I definitely have, at least a handful right now of men who are clients, but they're just for like the physical component. Um, that's my niche. That's where I've fallen upon. That's where I resonate most with. Women in general have kind of been more open with me to like dive into, because like we do some deep healing work. And for some men, like I had one client, he's like, this is really like, I don't know, I don't have emotions like that. I'm not going to discuss some of these things. And so it's not that it can't work for men. Men can eat intuitively, and men can probably go through this program and see great results. But that's just, where I have more passion for, and also like relating to the women so much more on another level.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense in a lot of ways. And it's crazy what men don't want to open up and talk about their feelings. That's weird.
Yeah, so weird. It's getting
Um,
better though. We're as a society, we're accepting like men can cry. It's okay.
yeah, it's almost maybe going too far the other direction in some cases. So I want to leave people with some actionables. So I guess what are like the three top easiest things a person can do to start eating healthier, maybe promote getting a little leaner, have more energy, so they can feel their best, basically.
I touched on this one already. Eat mindfully, right? Slow down when you're eating, put away the distractions, chew your food, and actually enjoy your darn food. Like if you're just eating chicken, bland chicken and rice, like you got to change that up, right? Healthy eating doesn't have to be chicken, rice, and broccoli with no flavoring. So yeah, I'd say eat mindfully. Have a plan, right? Whether it's like actually meal planning for the week or just making a grocery list. But at the very least, like, can you cut up fruits and veggies ahead of time and like stock them so you have grab and go things? Or even like trail mix popcorn if you know you're going to have a long time in between meals, so that by the time you get to the next meal, you're not starving. And then we all know what happens. We just eat whatever is in sight, or we, pull over to the fast food because we haven't really planned. Lastly, I would probably just say just aim to get at least one veggie on your plate. Maybe starting out like it's just one meal a day, like if you really are not eating veggies, but the goal is we want veggies breakfast, lunch, and dinner. But at least one vegetable. Like, can you commit to getting one more veggie on your plate?
Okay. And you don't really emphasize any type of veggie, it's some kind, just to get it going.
Just yeah, I mean, that's kind of like first and foremost, if we're going to get more specific, like yeah, can we get a variety of vegetables, different colors? If you only eat green veggies, can we get in some bright colored um not cucumbers, bell peppers, or other kinds of options, because our gut bacteria likes variety, right? Variety of fibers that we can incorporate. But no, like there's not, the whole superfood thing is really, again, diet culture that like, yeah, quinoa is great. Oatmeal is great as well. Chia seeds are great, but so are hemp seeds and some of these other seeds.
No, it's spirulina that will cure everything.
Spirulina and chlorophyll, and like, yeah, those things are great. They're good for us, but it's not like apple cider vinegar. It's not one specific food that is going to cure all disease. It's a combination of everything.
Yeah, that's just too reasonable. You can't be like that. um, so just so people kind of know what your process is like, what if someone were to reach out and wanted to work with you, like how's that work?
Yeah, so I have them fill out a pretty detailed health history. Right, we look at labs. If you've been to the doctor recently, like send me all of your labs, your diet history, exercise history, your sleep. I look at your relationships, life stressors, what it was like growing up in their family and their parents' relationship with food. did you have access to food? So kind of just getting a whole history and understanding of, how did you get to where you're at right now, and what is your relationship with food, and what is your experience in the gym as well, right? Any injuries. And I know you work with people with pain. I actually had sciatica for a couple years, so I learned a lot about spine pathology and back pain to heal that. So kind of, digging deep into that area as well.
Oh, cool. Yeah. That was helpful. I guess then the last thing is, where can people like learn more about you and then find you, and if they wanted to reach out, connect with you?
Yeah, probably my Instagram would be easiest. It's Hackett Health, right? Hackett with 2 T's. Or my website is just hackett.health. Either of those two.
Okay. Awesome. Well, I really appreciate you taking your time to chat with me and give us all this amazing knowledge. So this was awesome. Appreciate it.
Yeah,
There's
this
still
was great.
so much to talk about. Maybe we can do another one of these in the future.
There's so much when it comes to nutrition and health. Yeah. But thanks for having me.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks again. And then you have a great weekend, and we'll be in touch.
Same to you.
All right. Bye.
Bye.